My sister Amanda looked me dead in the eye and said, "Face it, Dina, you're completely worthless. You always have been." The words cut through me like shattered glass. But what she didn't know was that sitting in my modest apartment was a portfolio worth more than their entire neighborhood combined. What happened next would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, staring at my younger sister Amanda, who had just delivered those words, with the casual cruelty of someone commenting on the weather. Around us, the upscale bistro buzzed with conversation and the gentle clink of expensive silverware, but our corner table felt like it existed in its own bubble of poison. "Excuse me?" I whispered, setting my fork down carefully. My voice came out smaller than I intended, like I was 12 years old again, and she was telling me I couldn't sit with her friends. Amanda rolled her eyes, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her wine glass. "Oh, don't act so shocked, Nadine. We've all been thinking it for years. You're 43. You work at some little nonprofit nobody's ever heard of. You drive that embarrassing old Honda, and you live in that tiny apartment across town. Meanwhile, look at us." She gestured grandly, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Marcus just bought his third dealership. I'm renovating our lake house. And Mom and Dad are finally getting the retirement they deserve because we can actually contribute to their lives." My chest tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. 20 years of working in social services had taught me how to hide my emotions when people tried to tear me down. "I like my work, Amanda. I help people." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Help people? Dina, you make what, $35,000 a year? That's barely enough to help yourself, let alone anyone else. You're a charity case pretending to work in charity." Marcus, my older brother, had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now he leaned forward, his expensive suit stretching across his broad shoulders. "Amanda's not wrong, sis. I mean, I get that you want to feel good about yourself, but at some point, you have to face reality. You're not contributing anything meaningful to this family. When Dad needed help with Mom's medical bills last year, who stepped up? Me. When they wanted to take that anniversary cruise, who paid for it? Amanda and her husband. You brought a card from the drugstore." The words hit me like physical blows. I thought about that card, how I'd spent 20 minutes in the store reading through dozens of them, trying to find one that expressed how much I loved my parents. How I'd written a heartfelt message inside about how grateful I was for everything they'd given me. How I'd agonized over not being able to afford something more substantial. What they didn't know was that I could have paid for 10 cruises without blinking. But explaining that would require revealing things I'd kept hidden for 2 decades. "I do what I can," I said quietly, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "What you can isn't enough," Amanda snapped. "It's never been enough. Do you know what people say when they ask about you? They say, 'Oh, Dina, yeah, she's the disappointment. The one who never figured her life out.' It's embarrassing." Marcus nodded, cutting into his steak with sharp, aggressive movements. "Look, we're not trying to be cruel here. We're trying to help you see the truth. Maybe it's time you considered finding a real career. Something that actually pays. Something that would let you contribute to this family instead of just taking up space at these dinners." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Taking up space. Like I was some unwanted guest at my own family's table instead of their daughter and sister. "I'm not taking up space," I managed to say, though my voice cracked slightly. Amanda's laugh was cruel. "Aren't you? When was the last time you paid for dinner when we all went out? When was the last time you offered to help with anything that actually mattered? You show up with your sad little life and expect us to pretend like you're an equal part of this family, but you're not. You're dead weight." The restaurant seemed to tilt around me. Dead weight. I blinked hard, focusing on my breathing, trying not to let them see how deeply their words were cutting. "You know what?" Marcus continued, apparently warming to his theme. "I think the problem is that you've never had any real consequences for your choices. You've coasted through life doing the bare minimum, and we've all just accepted it because you're family. But maybe it's time for some tough love." "What are you saying?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Amanda and Marcus exchanged a look, and I saw something pass between them. Some decision they'd already made. "We're saying that maybe you shouldn't come to family gatherings anymore until you get your act together," Amanda said, her voice firm and final. "It's too painful watching you embarrass yourself and us. Come back when you have something real to show for your life." The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. I stared at them both, these people who had shared my childhood, who knew my middle name and my favorite color and the scar on my knee from when I fell off my bike at age 7. They were looking at me like I was a stranger, like I was nothing. "You're disinviting me from family events," I said slowly, making sure I understood. "We're giving you motivation," Marcus said, though he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "When you have a real job, a real life, real contributions to make, then we can talk about you being part of family celebrations again." I felt numb. Completely, utterly numb. I reached for my purse with hands that barely trembled, pulled out enough cash to cover my portion of the meal, and placed it carefully on the table. "Dina, don't be dramatic," Amanda said, rolling her eyes again. "We're trying to help you." I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. "No," I said quietly. "You're trying to hurt me." And you succeeded. I walked away from that table with my head held high, even though every step felt like walking through quicksand. Behind me, I heard Amanda say something to Marcus about me being too sensitive as usual, but I didn't turn around. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and turn signals that I navigated on autopilot. My modest apartment building came into view, its faded brick exterior and small windows looking exactly like what my siblings thought it was, the home of someone who had never amounted to anything. I climbed the 2 flights of stairs to my door, my legs heavy with more than just physical exhaustion. Inside, my apartment was quiet and dim, filled with secondhand furniture and mismatched dishes that I'd collected over the years. To anyone else, it would look like the home of someone struggling to make ends meet. They had no idea. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet, pushing aside the modest dresses and worn sweaters, until I reached the back corner. There, in a small fireproof safe, were documents that told a very different story about Nadine Dina Kelly. Bank statements showing balances with more zeros than most people saw in a lifetime. Investment portfolios that had been quietly growing for 20 years. Real estate holdings across 3 states. Patent royalties from a small invention I'd created in college that had become standard in a very specialized industry. I was worth nearly $8 million. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my siblings flaunted their success with expensive cars and designer clothes, I had been quietly building a fortune they couldn't even imagine. The nonprofit job I loved so much? It had been my choice, not my only option. I worked there because finding homes for foster children and helping families in crisis felt more important than making money I didn't need. But they would never understand that. To Amanda and Marcus, worth was measured in salary figures and luxury purchases. The idea that
preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Someone might choose a modest lifestyle while sitting on a substantial fortune would be incomprehensible to them. I closed the safe and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small framed photo on my nightstand. It was from my college graduation, all of us laughing together, my parents beaming with pride at all 3 of their children. We'd looked so happy then. So united. When had it all gone wrong? When had love become conditional on bank account balances and job titles? My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Hope you'll think about what we said tonight. We really do want what's best for you." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. They wanted what was best for them. They wanted a sister they could be proud of in public. Someone who reflected well on their family's success. They didn't want me as I was. The apartment felt smaller that night, like the walls were closing in. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights and thinking about choices. For 20 years, I had chosen privacy over recognition, humility over ostentation, purpose over profit. I had chosen to let my family believe I was struggling, while I quietly built security they couldn't fathom. And now they had chosen to cast me out because I didn't meet their standards of success. I thought about the foster kids I worked with, Teenagers aging out of the system with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and the hope that someone, somewhere, would give them a chance to prove their worth. I thought about the single mothers I helped find housing. Women who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford rent in a city that seemed designed to keep them down. I thought about the elderly man I'd visited that week, living alone with no family, whose face had lit up just because someone had remembered his name. My work meant something. My life meant something. Just not to the people who should have valued it most. I pulled my laptop over and opened my email, scrolling through messages from colleagues, clients, friends who had no idea about my financial situation, but who treated me with respect and kindness anyway. There was a thank you note from a teenager I'd helped get into college, pictures from a family I'd helped reunite, an invitation to speak at a conference about innovative approaches to social work. This was my real life, not the one my siblings saw, with its modest apartment and practical car and secondhand clothes. This life, full of purpose and connection and quiet victories that would never make headlines but changed individual worlds one person at a time. But their words still echoed in my head. Worthless. Dead weight. Embarrassing. I closed the laptop and walked to the window again, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. The city stretched out below me. Millions of people living their own complicated lives, most of them probably struggling with their own versions of not being enough for someone who mattered to them. Tomorrow, I would wake up and go to work. I would help a family find temporary housing, advocate for a child in the system, maybe review grant applications that could fund programs to help hundreds more people. I would do work that mattered, that made a real difference in the world. And my siblings would wake up thinking they had successfully delivered some tough love to their disappointing sister, never suspecting that the woman they had just dismissed was worth more than both of them combined. The thought should have felt satisfying. Instead, it just felt lonely. I made a decision that night, sitting in my quiet apartment with my secret fortune and my wounded heart. I wouldn't tell them the truth out of spite or revenge. But I also wouldn't continue to let them believe they had the right to determine my worth based on their narrow definition of success. If they wanted to cut me out of their lives because I didn't meet their standards, then they would have to live with that choice. And maybe, someday, they would discover what they had really lost. I wasn't worthless. I never had been. And it was time I stopped letting anyone, even family, convince me otherwise. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I went through my usual routine: coffee, toast, a quick scan of emails, but everything felt different. Hollow, like I was playing a part in someone else's life. At work, my colleague Janet noticed immediately. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, perching on the edge of my desk with her usual morning coffee. Janet was one of those people who seemed to see everything. Probably a side effect of 20 years in social work. "Family dinner last night," I said, which was explanation enough for anyone in our line of work. We'd all seen what family dynamics could do to people. "Ah." She nodded knowingly. "The kind where everyone has opinions about your life choices?" "Something like that." Janet studied my face for a moment. "You know, I've been thinking lately about how we measure success in this field. Yesterday I got a call from Sarah Martinez. Remember her? The teenager we placed with the Johnson family 3 years ago? She's graduating summa cum laude from nursing school next month." I managed a small smile. Sarah had been one of my first cases when I started at the agency. 15 years old, angry at the world, convinced that no one would ever want her. "That's wonderful." "She asked me to tell you specifically. Said you were the first person who ever made her believe she could have a real future." Janet paused, sipping her coffee. "Made me think about what we're really accomplishing here. It's not the kind of success that shows up on tax returns or in Christmas cards, but it's real. It changes lives." Her words hit closer to home than she could know. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Anyway," Janet continued, "I hope whoever gave you grief last night realizes how lucky they are to have you in their life. If only it were that simple." The morning passed in a blur of phone calls and case files. I met with a young mother trying to get her children back from foster care, helped an elderly man navigate the application process for senior housing, and reviewed a stack of emergency assistance requests that had come in over the weekend. Normal work, important work, but I found myself going through the motions, rather than feeling fully present. During my lunch break, I drove to the small park near my office and sat on a bench, watching children play on the swings while their parents chatted nearby. It was the kind of scene that usually brought me peace, but today it only emphasized my isolation. These families, flawed and complicated as they might be, were together. They belonged to each other. My phone rang, and for a split second my heart jumped, thinking it might be Amanda or Marcus calling to apologize. Instead, it was my mother. "Hi, sweetheart." Mom's voice came through warm and familiar. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Mom. How are you and Dad?" "Oh, we're good. Dad's finally finished that puzzle he's been working on for 3 months. You should see him. So proud of himself." She laughed, and the sound made my chest ache. "Listen, honey, I wanted to talk to you about something." Amanda called this morning. Of course she did. I gripped the phone tighter. "Oh?" "She told me about your conversation last night. She's worried about you, Dina. We all are." The careful way she said it told me everything I needed to know. Amanda had spun the story, painted herself as the concerned sister trying to help, made me the problem that needed solving. "I'm doing fine, Mom, really." There was a pause. "Sweetheart, I know you love your job, and that's wonderful. But Amanda has a point about being more practical. You're not getting any younger, and we worry about your security. Your father and I won't be around forever, and we want to know you'll be okay." The implications hung heavy in the air. They thought I would need their help someday. They thought I was one emergency away from destitution. "Mom, I promise you, I'm more secure than you think. I know you're responsible with money, honey, but on a non-profit salary." She trailed off delicately. "Maybe it's time to think about other options. Marcus knows people in the business world. He could probably help you find something more lucrative." Marcus could help me find something more lucrative. The irony was almost funny. My quarterly investment income was probably more than Marcus made in a year. But I couldn't say that without explaining 20 years of careful financial planning and deliberate secrecy. "I'll think about it," I said, because it was easier than arguing. "Good. And Dina? Don't be too hard on Amanda and Marcus. They love you. They just want what's best for you." After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at nothing. They love you. Did they? Or did they love the idea of me they wanted me to be? Successful in ways they could understand, contributing to the family in ways they could measure, living a life they could be proud of in public. The afternoon dragged by slowly. I found myself making mistakes I never usually made, losing track of conversations, staring out the window instead of focusing on the work in front of me. By 5 o'clock, I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with my workload. I drove home through evening traffic, past the shopping centers where my siblings probably bought their expensive clothes, past the restaurant districts where they took their important business meetings, past the gated communities where they lived their successful lives. My neighborhood, when I finally reached it, looked shabby by comparison. Older buildings, smaller yards, cars that had seen better days. But I liked it here. I liked my neighbors, the elderly woman who always waved from her garden, the young couple with the new baby who smiled shyly when we passed on the stairs, the teenager next door who was working his way through community college and sometimes asked for help with his homework. They were real people living real lives, not performances of success. In my apartment, I heated up leftover soup and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, too restless to sit. The walls felt closer than usual, filled with the echo of Amanda's words. Worthless. Dead weight. Embarrassing. I found myself opening the safe again, pulling out the investment statements and bank records, as if seeing the numbers could somehow validate my existence. $8 million. More money than my siblings would probably accumulate in their lifetimes, even with their high-earning careers and luxury purchases. But what did it mean if the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally couldn't see past my modest apartment and second-hand clothes to the person I actually was? I thought about my college friend Rebecca, who had been relentlessly pursued by a man who claimed to love her but constantly criticized her appearance, her career choices, her family background. We'd all told her he was toxic, that love wasn't supposed to come with conditions and constant pressure to change. She'd eventually ended the relationship and found someone who appreciated her exactly as she was. Was this any different? My siblings' love came with conditions too. Earn more money. Buy better things, live a life they could brag about. Change who you are so we can be proud of you. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had been trying to earn their love and approval for years, accepting their subtle criticisms and suggestions, feeling guilty for not being more like them. But maybe the problem wasn't with me at all. I pulled out my laptop and started typing, not sure exactly what I was writing until the words began to flow. A letter I would probably never send but needed to write. Dear Amanda and Marcus, I began. I've been thinking about our conversation last night, and I realize there are some things you don't understand about my life or my choices. I wrote for hours, pouring out years of accumulated hurt and frustration, explaining decisions they had never bothered to ask about, defending choices they had never tried to understand. I wrote about the satisfaction I found in my work, the relationships I had built, the quiet contentment of a life lived according to my own values, rather than other people's expectations. And then I wrote about the money. Not to prove them wrong or make them feel bad, but to illustrate just how completely they had misjudged me. How their assumptions about my worth and my capabilities were based on surface appearances, rather than any real knowledge of who I was or what I had accomplished. When I finally stopped typing, it was after midnight. I read through the letter once, then closed the laptop without saving it. I didn't need to send it to know what I wanted to say. I didn't need their validation to know my own worth. But I also knew that something fundamental had shifted that night. The relationship I had with my siblings, the careful balance I had maintained between privacy and family obligation, the quiet acceptance of their judgment, all of that was ending. They had forced my hand by cutting me out of their lives. Now I had to decide whether to fight for a place at their table or build my own table entirely. The answer, when it came to me, was surprisingly clear. I was done being their charity case, their disappointment, their cautionary tale. I was done accepting crumbs of conditional love from people who should have been my biggest supporters. I was done hiding my success to make them feel better about their assumptions. It was time they learned who Nadine Kelly really was. And tomorrow, I would begin showing them. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The hurt from last night's dinner was still there, sharp and persistent, but it was accompanied by something else now. A sense of purpose that made my hands steady as I made my coffee and got dressed for work. I had spent 2 decades carefully managing my image, allowing my family to see only what they expected to see. The modest apartment, the practical car, the simple clothes. All of it had been a choice, but they had interpreted it as evidence of failure. Today, that was going to start changing. At work, I found myself moving through my tasks with unusual efficiency. I helped Mrs. Patterson navigate the Medicare application process, connected the Rodriguez family with emergency housing assistance, and reviewed 3 grant proposals that could bring significant funding to our programs. But underneath it all, I was planning. During my lunch break, I made the first call. Wellington Private Wealth Management, this is Caroline speaking. Hello, Caroline. This is Nadine Kelly. I'd like to schedule an appointment with Mr. Wellington as soon as possible. Of course, Ms. Kelly. May I ask what this regarding? Portfolio restructuring and some new investment opportunities I'd like to discuss. There was a brief pause as she pulled up my file. I could almost hear her surprise when she saw the numbers. Certainly. Would tomorrow at 2 o'clock work for you? Perfect. The second call was to my real estate agent, Patricia Morse, who had handled several of my property acquisitions over the years. Dina, how lovely to hear from you. Are you ready to look at that downtown loft we discussed? Actually, Patricia, I'm thinking bigger. Much bigger. I want you to start looking for something in Meadowbrook Estates. Meadowbrook Estates was where Amanda lived. The exclusive gated community she loved to mention in casual conversation. Something impressive. Price isn't a primary concern. Patricia's voice perked up with interest. Meadowbrook Estates? Well, that's exciting. There are a few properties coming on the market soon. There's a stunning colonial on Oak Ridge Drive. 6 bedrooms, 4-car garage, infinity pool. The asking price is $2.8 million. Set up a viewing for this weekend. Absolutely. Dina, may I ask what prompted this change? Not that I'm complaining. I'm thrilled you're ready to invest in something special. I smiled, looking out my office window at the busy street below. Let's just say I'm ready to stop hiding my light under a bushel. The third call was the most satisfying. Marcus Kelly Automotive, this is Marcus. Hi, Marcus. It's Dina. There was a pause, and I could hear voices in the background, the busy sound of a successful car dealership. Dina, hey, how are you doing? Still thinking about what we talked about last night? Actually, that's why I'm calling. I'm in the market for a new car. Oh. He sounded genuinely surprised. Well, that's great. I mean, it's about time you got rid of that old Honda. What kind of budget are we working with? I can probably find you something reliable for around $15,000-20,000. Maybe something certified pre-owned? I was thinking more in the luxury range. New, fully loaded. What do you have in BMW or Mercedes? The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Dina, those cars start at around $60,000. For a decent model, you're looking at $80,000-90,000 easy. That sounds perfect. When can I come in to look at options? Dina, how exactly are you planning to pay for this? I mean, on your salary. Let me worry about the financing, Marcus. When are you free? Another pause. Tomorrow afternoon? Around 4? I'll be there. The rest of the workday passed in a blur of anticipation. I felt like an actor who had been playing a role for so long that I'd almost forgotten who I really was underneath. Tonight, I would start remembering. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went shopping for clothes. Not at the discount stores I usually frequented, but at the upscale boutiques downtown where I'd always felt like an intruder. Tonight, I walked in with confidence, my credit card ready. The saleswoman at Nordstrom was polite but clearly sizing me up, probably trying to determine whether I could afford anything in the store. I let her show me a few moderately priced items before pointing to a stunning navy suit in the window. I'd like to try that one. That's a beautiful piece, she said carefully. It's part of our designer collection. The price point is quite high. How high? $1,800. I'll take it. And I'd like to see what you have in evening wear. Her entire demeanor changed. Suddenly, I wasn't a browsing customer to be politely tolerated. I was a serious buyer worthy of attention. She brought out dress after dress, each one more beautiful than the last. I selected 3, along with shoes, jewelry, and a handbag that cost more than most people's rent. The total came to just over $6,000. I handed over my black American Express card, the one I'd had for years but rarely used, and watched her eyes widen slightly when it went through without any problems. Will you be wearing one of these items tonight? She asked as she carefully wrapped everything. Tomorrow, I said. I have some family business to attend to. At home, I hung my new clothes carefully in the closet, running my fingers over the fine fabrics. For so long, I had told myself that appearances didn't matter, that what mattered was the work I did and the people I helped. And that was still true. But I was beginning to understand that sometimes appearances were a language people spoke, and if I wanted to communicate with my family, I needed to speak their language. I spent the evening making more calls, setting more plans in motion. I contacted my accountant, my financial advisor, even my attorney. By the time I went to bed, I had orchestrated what amounted to a complete revelation of my true financial status. The next day, I called in sick to work, the first time I'd done so in over a year. Instead, I drove to my appointment with Wellington Private Wealth Management, wearing my new navy suit and feeling like a different person entirely. The Wellington building was all glass and marble, the kind of place that spoke quietly of serious money and serious people. I'd been here before, but always dressed down, always trying to blend in. Today, I walked through the lobby like I belonged there. Ms. Kelly, Mr. Wellington greeted me with the warm smile reserved for his most valued clients. You look lovely today. I understand you're interested in some portfolio adjustments? I want to liquidate $2 million worth of my more conservative investments, I said without preamble. I'm planning some major purchases, and I want the funds readily available. He raised an eyebrow but made notes on his tablet. Certainly. May I ask what's prompting this change in strategy? You've been quite conservative with your investments up until now. Let's just say I'm ready to be more visible with my assets. I see. And the remaining $6 million? Keep it growing. But I want monthly statements sent to my home address instead of being held here. He nodded, though I could see the curiosity in his eyes. Of course. Anything else? Actually, yes. I want you to prepare a complete portfolio summary. Every investment, every property, every asset. Something comprehensive that shows the full scope of my holdings. That's quite detailed. May I ask what you'll be using it for? I smiled, thinking of Amanda's condescending voice, Marcus's dismissive tone. Family meeting. After leaving Wellington's office, I drove to Patricia's real estate agency to review the Meadowbrook Estates property listings. The photos were stunning. Sprawling homes with manicured lawns, circular driveways, the kind of places that screamed success from every architectural detail. This one, I said, pointing to the colonial Patricia had mentioned. I want to see it today. Today? But Dina, shouldn't we discuss financing first? A property like this requires significant documentation, proof of funds. I opened my purse and pulled out the bank statement Wellington had printed for me. Just one account, showing a balance of $2 million. Will this suffice as proof of funds? Patricia's mouth opened slightly as she stared at the numbers. Yes. Yes, this will definitely suffice. Let me call the listing agent right now. The house was even more impressive in person. 6,000 square feet of luxury spread across 2 acres of perfectly landscaped grounds. The foyer alone was larger than my current living room, with a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than my annual salary. The kitchen was a masterpiece of granite and stainless steel. The master bedroom had a fireplace and a balcony overlooking the pool. It's perfect, I said as we finished the tour. It really is spectacular, Patricia agreed. Should we discuss making an offer? In this market, you might want to start at 2.6 and see if they'll negotiate. I'll pay full asking price, cash. I want to close as soon as possible. Patricia nearly dropped her tablet. Cash? Dina, are you sure? Even with your obvious financial capability, tying up that much liquidity in real estate. I'm sure. Drop the papers. From there, I drove to Marcus's dealership, still wearing my designer suit, still feeling like I was inhabiting someone else's life. The lot was full of gleaming vehicles, from practical sedans to luxury sports cars. A young salesman approached me immediately, but I asked for Marcus specifically. He came out of his office looking harried, probably expecting to have to give his embarrassing sister the family discount on some economy model. He stopped short when he saw me. Dina? Wow, you look different. Thank you. I'm ready to look at those luxury cars we discussed. He led me through the lot, pointing out features and options, but I could see him watching me carefully, trying to figure out what had changed since yesterday. When we stopped in front of a gleaming silver Mercedes SUV, I ran my hand along the hood appreciatively. This one, I said. Fully loaded, all the options. Dina, this one is $92,000. Perfect. I don't understand. Yesterday you were working at that nonprofit, living in that little apartment. How are you planning to finance this? I pulled out my checkbook, the one connected to my main account, the one I'd never used for anything bigger than a grocery bill, and wrote out a check for the full amount. No financing necessary. Marcus stared at the check like it might disappear if he blinked. Dina, what the hell is going on? Where did you get this money? It's my money, Marcus. It's always been my money. But how? You work for a nonprofit. You make practically nothing. I make enough. The rest I earned other ways. I handed him the check. Will this clear today? He looked at the numbers again, shaking his head. I need to make some calls, verify the funds. Of course. Take your time. I'll wait. While Marcus disappeared into his office to call the bank, I sat in the customer lounge, sipping coffee and watching him through the glass wall. I could see him on the phone, his expression growing more incredulous with each passing minute. When he finally emerged, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. The funds are good, he said slowly. Dina, I don't understand any of this. You don't need to understand it, you just need to process the sale. But this changes everything. If you have this kind of money, why are you living like you do? Why are you working at that job? Why didn't you tell us? I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. Because I liked my life the way it was. Because I believed that family should accept you for who you are, not what you have. Because I thought you all knew me well enough to see past appearances. Dina, I'll be back tomorrow to pick up the car. Have the paperwork ready. I walked out of the dealership feeling lighter than I had in years, even as I could feel Marcus's confused stare following me to my old Honda. Let him wonder. Let him try to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the woman who had just paid cash for a luxury vehicle without blinking. That evening, I sat in my modest apartment, surrounded by shopping bags and legal documents and bank statements, planning my next move. Amanda's words from that horrible dinner kept echoing in my mind. You're completely worthless. You always have been. Tomorrow, she would start learning just how wrong she'd been. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Amanda's contact information. My finger hovered over her number for a long moment before I pressed call. Dina! She sounded surprised. I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. Hi, Amanda. I was wondering if you and Marcus might like to meet for coffee tomorrow. There are some things I'd like to discuss with you both. Oh. There was a pause, and I could practically hear her thinking. Well, I suppose that would be fine. Are you ready to talk seriously about your future? About making some real changes? Something like that, I said. How about that cafe on Elm Street? The one near your neighborhood? All right, what time? 10 o'clock? Fine. Dina, I hope you're approaching this with an open mind. Marcus and I really do want what's best for you. I'm sure you do, I said. See you tomorrow. After I hung up, I pulled out the portfolio summary Wellington had prepared. 43 pages of detailed financial information that told the complete story of my wealth. Every investment, every property, every stream of income I'd built over 2 decades of careful planning. Tomorrow, my siblings would learn that their worthless sister was worth more than both of them combined. Tomorrow, the balance of power in our family would shift permanently. I wasn't doing this for revenge, I told myself. I was doing it for honesty. For 20 years, I had allowed them to see a false version of me because I thought it didn't matter what they believed about my financial status. But it did matter. It mattered because their assumptions about my worth had shaped how they treated me, how they spoke to me, how they valued my place in our family. If appearances were the only language they understood, then appearances were how I would communicate. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for tomorrow's conversation, thinking about what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. I wasn't interested in humiliating them or making them feel small. I just wanted them to understand that they had been wrong about me, completely, fundamentally wrong. The next morning, I dressed carefully in one of my new outfits. An elegant black dress with a matching blazer that probably cost more than I usually spent on clothes in a year. I styled my hair differently, applied makeup with more care than usual, and put on the pearl earrings I'd bought the day before. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a successful, confident woman who belonged in expensive restaurants and high-end stores. Someone who could write 6-figure checks without a second thought. Someone whose worth couldn't be measured by the size of her apartment or the age of her car. I drove to the cafe in my old Honda one last time, knowing that after today, everything would be different. The parking lot was full of luxury vehicles, BMWs, Audis, the occasional Tesla. By tomorrow, my new Mercedes would fit right in. Amanda was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table and checking her phone. She looked up as I approached and did a double take. Dina? My God, you look amazing! Where did you get that dress? Thank you. I said, sliding into the seat across from her. You look lovely too. Marcus arrived a few minutes later, and I saw the same surprised expression cross his face when he saw me. Wow, sis. You clean up nice. Special occasion. You could say that. The server took our orders, and I waited until we were alone again before reaching into my purse. I pulled out the portfolio summary Wellington had prepared and set it on the table between us. What's this? Amanda asked, eyeing the thick document. It's the reason I wanted to meet with you both today. I think it's time you knew the truth about my financial situation. Marcus frowned. Dina, if this is about asking for money, it's not. I opened the folder to the first page, which showed a summary of my total net worth in large, bold numbers. It's about showing you money. The silence that followed was profound. Amanda stared at the page for a long moment, her lips moving slightly as she counted zeros. Marcus leaned over to see what she was looking at, and his face went pale. This is a joke, Amanda said finally. $8 million? Dina, this has to be some kind of mistake. It's not a mistake. Turn the page. They did, revealing detailed listings of my investment accounts, real estate holdings, and various income streams. Page after page of assets they had never suspected, never imagined, never thought to ask about. I don't understand, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. How is this possible? You work at a nonprofit. I work at a nonprofit because I choose to work at a nonprofit. Because I believe in the mission. Because I find it fulfilling. Because it gives my life meaning. Not because it's my only option. Amanda was still staring at the numbers, shaking her head. But your apartment, your car, your clothes, were all choices I made to live modestly while building real wealth. While you two were buying expensive things to look successful, I was actually becoming successful. The server brought our coffee, and we sat in stunned silence until she left. Finally, Marcus spoke. Why didn't you tell us? All these years, why did you let us think? Let you think what? That I was struggling? That I needed your pity? Your advice about getting a real job? I could hear the edge creeping into my voice, and forced myself to stay calm. I let you think what you wanted to think because I believed that my worth to this family shouldn't be measured by my bank account. But we worried about you, Amanda said, though her voice lacked conviction. No, you judged me. There's a difference. You decided that because I didn't live the way you thought I should live, I was somehow less valuable as a person, less worthy of respect. Marcus was flipping through the pages now, his expression growing more incredulous with each new revelation. The rental properties in Florida, the patents, the stock portfolio. Dina, some of these investments are brilliant. How did you know to get into renewable energy before it took off? Research, planning. The same way anyone builds wealth, Marcus. I just did it quietly. Amanda suddenly looked up from the documents, her eyes sharp. Wait. If you've had all this money, why didn't you help with Mom and Dad's expenses? Why did Marcus and I have to cover everything? The question hung in the air like an accusation, and I felt my carefully maintained composure crack slightly. I offered to help, I said quietly. Many times. But every time I suggested contributing to their medical bills or vacation funds, you two made it clear that my contribution wasn't needed or wanted. Remember when Dad had his surgery 3 years ago? I offered to help with the hospital bills. And you said don't worry about it, Dina. We know money's tight for you. You didn't ask if I could afford it. You assumed I couldn't. Marcus had the grace to look uncomfortable. We were trying to protect you. No, you were trying to maintain your roles as the successful children who take care of everyone else. You liked being the ones Mom and Dad could count on. You liked being the heroes of the family narrative. That's not fair, Amanda protested. Isn't it? When was the last time either of you asked me about my life in any meaningful way? When was the last time you wondered how I could afford to live independently on what you assumed was my salary? When was the last time you considered that maybe there was more to my story than what you could see on the surface? They didn't answer because there was no answer. They had created a version of me that fit their understanding of the world, and they had never bothered to question whether that version was accurate. So what happens now? Marcus asked finally. I closed the portfolio and put it back in my purse. Now you know the truth. I'm not your struggling little sister who needs your guidance and pity. I'm a successful woman who has been quietly building a life and a fortune while you assumed I was failing at both. Dina, Amanda started, but I held up a hand. I'm not done. Tomorrow, I'm moving into a house in Meadowbrook Estates, a house I bought with cash. I'm driving a new Mercedes that I also paid for in cash. I'm doing these things not because I need them, but because I'm tired of hiding who I am to make you feel better about your assumptions. The stunned silence stretched between us again. Finally, Amanda spoke, her voice small. I'm sorry. We're sorry. We had no idea. No, you didn't. And you know why? Because you never asked. You never looked beyond the surface. You never considered that, maybe, just maybe, your little sister knew what she was doing with her life. I stood up, leaving money on the table for my coffee. I'm not angry anymore. I'm disappointed. I'm sad. But I'm not angry. I hope someday we can rebuild our relationship on a foundation of actual understanding, instead of assumptions and judgments. Where are you going? Marcus asked. To live my life. Openly, honestly, without apology. You're welcome to be part of it, but only if you can accept me as I actually am, not as you think I should be. I walked out of the cafe feeling simultaneously vindicated and hollow. They knew the truth now. The secret I had kept for 2 decades was finally out in the open. But I wasn't sure yet whether that would fix anything between us or break it permanently. What I did know was that I was done living my life according to other people's expectations. I was done being ashamed of my choices, apologetic for my differences, grateful for crumbs of conditional acceptance. From now on, I would be exactly who I was: successful, generous, fulfilled, and worth far more than anyone had ever imagined. The drive home from the cafe felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but my mind was racing, replaying every expression that had crossed my siblings' faces when they saw those numbers. The shock, the disbelief, the slow dawning realization that everything they thought they knew about me was wrong. My phone started ringing before I even made it back to my apartment. Amanda's name flashed on the screen, then Marcus's, then Amanda again. I let them all go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear their voices yet, wasn't ready for whatever mixture of apologies and questions and accusations they might throw at me. Instead, I drove to the office building where I'd worked for the past 8 years, parking my old Honda in the same spot I'd used countless times before. But everything felt different now. I wasn't the struggling nonprofit worker anymore, at least not in my family's eyes. I was the woman with $8 million who chose to work with foster children and homeless families because it mattered to her. Janet looked up from her desk as I walked in, clearly surprised to see me after I'd called in sick that morning. Dina? I thought you weren't feeling well today. I had some personal business to take care of, I said, settling into my chair. Family stuff. She studied my face with the perceptive gaze that made her so good at this job. The kind of family stuff that requires designer clothing? I glanced down at my outfit, having almost forgotten that I was dressed so differently than usual. Something like that. Good for you, she said firmly. Sometimes family needs to be reminded that they don't know everything about us. If only she knew how right she was. The afternoon passed in a blur of routine tasks, but I found myself constantly distracted by my phone. By 5 o'clock, I had 17 missed calls and 12 voicemails from various family members. Amanda and Marcus, of course, but also my mother, my father, even Amanda's husband Derek, who I'd spoken to maybe 10 times in the past 5 years. The word was spreading. I waited until I was back in my apartment to listen to the messages, pouring myself a glass of wine and settling onto my couch with my phone. The first few were from Amanda, her voice progressing from confused to frantic to something approaching panic. Dina, call me back. I don't understand what happened today. We need to talk. Dina, this is serious. Mom is asking questions and I don't know what to tell her. Please call me. Dina, where did this money come from? I'm not trying to be nosy, but as your sister, I need to know this is all legal. Call me back. Legal. The implications stung more than it should have. Even faced with documented proof of my legitimate wealth, Amanda's first instinct was to question whether I'd obtained it through proper means. Marcus's messages followed a similar pattern, though his tone was more bewildered than accusatory. Sis, I've been thinking about our conversation all day. I keep looking at those numbers and wondering how I missed this. How we all missed this. Can we talk? Dina, I told Derek about the portfolio, and he wants to know who your financial advisor is. He's impressed. We're all impressed. And confused. Very confused. The message from my mother was the hardest to hear. Sweetheart, Amanda told me you had some kind of meeting today. She said there were documents, numbers she didn't understand. I'm worried about you, honey. Can you call me? Your father and I just want to make sure you're okay. Worried about me. Even now, even with proof of my financial success, they were worried about me. Not proud, not amazed, not curious about how I'd accomplished something remarkable. Worried. I deleted the messages without listening to the rest, and called Patricia instead. Dina, perfect timing. I have wonderful news about the Meadowbrook property. The sellers accepted your offer, and we can close as early as next Friday if you're ready. I'm ready, I said. What do I need to do? Just show up with proof of funds and identification. Your attorney will handle the rest. Oh, and Dina? I took the liberty of mentioning your purchase to a few colleagues. You're gonna love living in Meadowbrook. The community there is very exclusive, very successful. You'll fit right in. Fit right in. The phrase should have felt validating, but instead it made me slightly nauseous. Was that what I wanted? To fit in with people who measured worth by property values and car payments? After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, looking around at the mismatched furniture and second-hand decorations that had been my home for so long. In a week, I would be living in a mansion with more square footage than some apartment buildings. The change felt monumental and terrifying. My phone rang again. This time it was my father. Hi, Dad. Dina, sweetheart, your mother and I are concerned. Amanda called us today, very upset, talking about money and documents. She wasn't making much sense. Can you help us understand what's going on? I closed my eyes, trying to figure out how to explain 20 years of financial planning to my 70-year-old father, who still balanced his checkbook by hand. Dad, I have some investments, some assets. Amanda and Marcus saw the paperwork today, and they were surprised by the amounts. What kind of amounts, honey? Substantial amounts. There was a long pause. Dina, I know you're a smart girl, but I want you to be careful. There are a lot of scams out there, people who prey on folks like you who might not understand complicated financial instruments. If someone has promised you returns that seem too good to be true, Dad, the money is real. I earned it legitimately over many years. I own rental properties. I have patents on some inventions. I've made good investments. It's not a scam. Another pause. But, sweetheart, on your salary. My salary from the nonprofit is just one source of income. It's not my primary source. I don't understand. I know you don't. That's okay. But, Dad, I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing with my finances. I've been managing them successfully for 2 decades. Of course, honey, of course. It's just, this is all very sudden. Very surprising. It's only sudden because no one ever asked me about my financial situation before. Everyone just assumed. We weren't trying to assume anything negative, sweetheart. We just wanted to make sure you were okay. I am okay, Dad. I've been okay for a long time. I just haven't been living in a way that broadcast my financial status. We talked for a few more minutes, my father asking gentle questions, and me providing careful answers. He was trying to understand, which was more than I could say for my siblings. But even his concern felt tinged with disbelief, as if he couldn't quite accept that his youngest daughter had been quietly accumulating wealth, while everyone worried about her future. The weekend passed in a strange haze of normalcy and upheaval. I went grocery shopping, did laundry, read a book, watched movies, all the usual activities of my quiet life. But underneath it all was the constant awareness that everything was changing. My phone continued to ring with calls from family members, but I answered selectively, speaking briefly with my parents and avoiding Amanda and Marcus entirely. On Sunday afternoon, I drove to Meadowbrook Estates to see my new neighborhood. The guard at the gate recognized Patricia's name when I mentioned viewing the Oak Ridge property, and waved me through with a professional smile. The streets were wide and perfectly maintained, lined with massive homes set back on manicured lawns. Every house looked like something from a magazine spread, all carefully designed to project success and refinement. I found my future home and sat in my car outside the wrought iron gates, trying to imagine myself living there. The house was beautiful, undeniably so, but it felt like putting on costume jewelry, impressive from a distance, but somehow false when you got up close. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "We need to talk. This has gone on long enough." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "I agree, but not until you're ready to listen," instead of just reacting. Her response came immediately. "I'm ready. We're ready. Can you come to dinner tonight? Just family." Just family. The phrase that had once meant warmth and belonging now felt loaded with expectation and judgment. "I'll be there at 7, I replied. The drive to my parents' house that evening felt like traveling back in time. I dressed carefully again, choosing a understated but expensive outfit that would communicate my changed status without seeming ostentatious. The new pearl necklace I'd bought caught the light as I checked my reflection in the rear-view mirror. My mother's house looked exactly the same as always, modest, comfortable, filled with 40 years of accumulated family life. But when I walked through the front door, the atmosphere was different. Everyone was already there. My parents, Amanda and her husband Derek, Marcus and his wife Jennifer. They all turned to look at me as I entered, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Dina? Sweetheart?" my mother said, crossing the room to hug me. "You look lovely. That's a beautiful necklace." "Thank you, Mom." We gathered in the living room, the same room where we'd celebrated countless holidays and birthdays, where we'd argued about curfews and college choices and career paths. But tonight felt different. Formal. Tense. "So," my father said, settling into his favorite chair, "Amanda and Marcus have told us about your meeting the other day, about some financial documents you shared with them." "That's right." "Honey," my mother said gently, "we're all a little confused. Can you help us understand what's been going on with your situation?" "My situation." Even now, they couldn't quite bring themselves to say the words. "What would you like to know?" Amanda leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Dina, those numbers we saw, $8 million, is that real?" "It's real." "But how?" Marcus asked. "I mean, I've been thinking about this all weekend, trying to figure out how someone makes that kind of money without anyone noticing." "I didn't make it without anyone noticing. I made it without anyone asking." Derek, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Dina, I work in finance. Those investment portfolios Amanda showed me, the diversification, the strategic timing. That's sophisticated wealth management. Who's been advising you?" "I've worked with several financial advisors over the years, but most of the decisions were mine." "That's impossible," Jennifer said, speaking for the first time. "No offense, but you don't have the background for that kind of investment strategy. Someone had to be guiding you." The casual dismissal in her voice sparked something hot and defensive in my chest. "Actually, I do have the background. I have a master's degree in economics that I earned at night while working full-time. I've been studying markets and investment strategies for 25 years. I may work in social services, but I'm not financially illiterate." The room fell silent. Even Jennifer looked taken aback by the edge in my voice. "You have a master's degree?" my mother asked. "When did you get a master's degree?" "I finished it 6 years ago." I mentioned it at the time, but everyone was busy with their own lives. Another uncomfortable silence. My father cleared his throat. "Dina, I think what everyone is trying to understand is why you've been so secretive about all this. If you've been doing so well, why didn't you tell us?" The question I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. I looked around the room at these people who shared my blood, my history, my childhood memories, and tried to find words that would help them understand. "Because I knew this would happen," I said quietly. I knew that the moment you found out about the money, everything would change. The way you look at me, the way you talk to me, the assumptions you make about my choices. For 20 years, I've been the same person with the same values and the same priorities. But now that you know I have money, suddenly I'm different in your eyes. That's not true, Amanda protested. Isn't it? 3 days ago, you told me I was worthless and embarrassing. You said I was dead weight in this family. But now you're all sitting here asking me for financial advice and trying to understand my investment strategies. What changed? Not me. Just your perception of me. Marcus winced. Dina, what we said at dinner, we were wrong. We see that now. You were wrong then, but not because I have money. You were wrong because you judged me based on appearances instead of actually knowing me. You were wrong because you decided that financial success was the only measure of a person's worth. We never said that, Derek interjected. You didn't have to say it. You showed it. Every time you talked about my little job, like it was something to be ashamed of. Every time you made assumptions about what I could afford or contribute. Every time you treated me like the family charity case who needed your protection and guidance. My mother's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Sweetheart, we never meant to make you feel that way. I know you didn't mean to, but you did. And the worst part is that you never asked. In 20 years, none of you ever asked me if I was happy with my life, if I felt fulfilled by my work, if I had other interests or income sources, or plans for the future. You looked at my modest apartment and my practical car and decided you knew everything about my circumstances. So you decided to hide the truth from us? Amanda asked, and there was hurt in her voice now alongside the confusion. I decided to live my life according to my own values instead of trying to impress people who had already made up their minds about me. I decided that if you couldn't love and respect the person I appeared to be, then you probably didn't deserve to know the full extent of who I actually was. The words hung heavy in the air. My mother was crying now, quietly but openly. My father looked stricken. Amanda and Marcus were staring at their hands. That's harsh, Jennifer said. Is it? Or is it honest? I looked around the room again. I'm not angry anymore. I was hurt, and I was disappointed, but I'm not angry. What I am is tired. Tired of apologizing for my choices. Tired of being grateful for conditional acceptance. Tired of pretending that your opinions about my life matter more than my own satisfaction with it. They don't, my father said quietly. Your happiness should matter more than our opinions. You're absolutely right about that. Then why does it feel like I'm on trial here? Why do I feel like I have to justify every financial decision I've made, instead of you apologizing for every assumption you made about me? Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Because we feel like idiots, okay? We feel like complete idiots for getting everything so wrong. We feel like we don't know you at all, and that's terrifying. You're our sister, our daughter, and we completely misjudged your entire life. How do we come back from that? By accepting that you misjudged me and doing better going forward. By asking questions instead of making assumptions. By treating me like an adult who is capable of making her own decisions about her life and her money. And by apologizing, my mother said through her tears. By saying we're sorry for making you feel like you weren't enough. Because you've always been enough. You've always been more than enough. The apology I'd been waiting for, but hearing it felt more complicated than I'd expected. Relief mixed with sadness. Vindication tempered by the knowledge that the damage was already done. I appreciate that, Mom. I do. But I need you all to understand that this isn't just about an apology. This is about a fundamental change in how we relate to each other. I'm not going to go back to being the family disappointment just because it's comfortable for everyone. What does that mean practically? Derek asked. It means I'm moving to Meadowbrook Estates next week. It means I'm driving a new Mercedes. It means I'm going to live openly as the person I actually am instead of the person you thought I was. And it means that if you can't handle that change, if you can't respect my choices even when they don't match your expectations, then we're going to have problems. Amanda looked up sharply. You're moving to Meadowbrook? That's our neighborhood. I know. But why? You love your little apartment. You always said you didn't care about material things. I don't care about material things for their own sake. but I care about being honest about who I am. I care about not hiding my success to make other people comfortable. And frankly, I care about making a point. What point? That your assumptions about me were wrong. Completely fundamentally wrong. And that maybe you should think twice before judging anyone based on appearances. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from my investment strategies, to my work at the nonprofit, to my plans for the future. Slowly, gradually, the tenor shifted from interrogation to genuine curiosity. My family began asking real questions instead of accusatory ones, began listening to my answers instead of waiting for their turn to speak. But underneath the surface reconciliation, I could feel the fundamental shift in our dynamic. I was no longer the youngest sister who needed guidance and protection. I was a successful woman who had been managing her own affairs quite capably, thank you very much. The balance of power had shifted permanently. When I finally left that evening, my mother hugged me tightly at the door. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of the woman you've become, with or without the money." "Thank you, Mom. That means everything to me." As I drove home through the quiet streets, I felt simultaneously drained and energized. The truth was finally out, the confrontation was behind me, and I could move forward without the weight of secrecy. But I also knew that things would never be quite the same with my family. They would try to treat me the same way they always had, but they would never again see me as the struggling little sister who needed their help and guidance. Maybe that was a good thing. Maybe it was time for all of us to grow up and relate to each other as the adults we actually were, rather than the children we used to be. The next morning, I drove to Marcus's dealership to pick up my new Mercedes. He was waiting for me in the showroom, holding the keys and a folder of paperwork. "She's all ready for you," he said, gesturing toward the gleaming silver SUV. "Full tank of gas, all the warranties activated, everything you asked for." I signed the final documents and accepted the keys, feeling strange about this transaction with my brother. It felt both completely normal and utterly surreal. "Dina," Marcus said as I prepared to leave, "I want you to know that I've been thinking about everything you said last night. About the assumptions we made, the way we treated you. You were right to call us out on that. I know I was right. The question is whether anything actually changes going forward." "It will. I promise it will. And Dina, I'm sorry. For all of it. You deserved better from us." I nodded, not quite ready to say, "It's okay," because it wasn't okay, but willing to accept his apology as a starting point. "Thank you for saying that." Driving the Mercedes home felt like inhabiting a different identity. The car was smooth and quiet and luxurious in ways my old Honda had never been. But more than that, it was a visible symbol of my success, a statement that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. When I pulled into my apartment complex, I saw Mrs. Henderson from next door watering her plants on the small balcony. She waved, then did a double take when she saw the car. "Dina? Is that your new car?" "It is." "It's beautiful. You must be doing very well for yourself." "I am, Mrs. Henderson. I really am." And for the first time in years, I said those words without any qualification or explanation or apology. I was doing well for myself, and there was nothing wrong with admitting it. That afternoon, I went to work for what would be one of my last days in the modest office where I'd spent 8 years of my life. Janet looked up as I walked in, her eyebrows rising when she saw me through the window. "Nice ride," she said with a grin. "Family business went well, I take it? You could say that." "Good for you, Dina. Sometimes people need to be reminded that they don't know everything about us." The day passed quickly, filled with the usual mix of client calls and paperwork and small crises that needed immediate attention. But I found myself looking around the office with new eyes, thinking about what I would miss when I inevitably moved on to something else. Because that was the next decision I had to make. Now that the truth about my financial situation was out, I could no longer pretend that I needed this job for survival. I could continue working here because I loved it, or I could move on to something else entirely. For the first time in my adult life, work was truly optional. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. As I drove home that evening in my new car, I thought about the woman I'd been just a week ago. Secretive, defensive, constantly trying to justify her choices to people who couldn't see past their own assumptions. That woman felt like a stranger to me now. The woman I was becoming was someone who owned her success, who spoke her truth without apology, who refused to hide her light under a bushel just to make other people comfortable. It was time to find out what that woman was capable of. 3 months later, I stood in the marble foyer of my new home, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as a catering truck pulled up the circular driveway. Today was the day I'd been planning for weeks. A housewarming party that would officially announce my presence in Meadowbrook Estates and, more importantly, mark my complete transformation from the woman my family thought they knew to the woman I actually was. The house had been everything Patricia promised and more. 6,000 square feet of elegant living space, a gourmet kitchen that looked like something from a magazine, a library with built-in shelves that I'd already filled with books on economics, social policy, and sustainable investing. The master suite had a fireplace and a view of the infinity pool that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. It was a home that spoke of success in a language everyone could understand. But it was also, surprisingly, a home that felt like me. I'd chosen the furniture carefully, mixing high-end pieces with items that had sentimental value. The Afghan my grandmother had crocheted still draped over the back of a chair, now a $1,000 Italian leather chair, but the sentiment remained the same. My diplomas hung in the study, both of them, including the master's degree in economics that my family had somehow overlooked for 6 years. The transformation hadn't been limited to my living situation. I'd left my position at the nonprofit the month before, but not before establishing an endowment that would fund 3 full-time positions in perpetuity. The look on Janet's face when I'd handed her the check for $5 million was something I'd treasure forever. "Dina," she'd whispered, staring at the numbers. "This is impossible. This will change everything for these families." "That's the idea," I'd said. "I want kids like Sarah Martinez to have the support they need, even when I'm not here to provide it directly." I'd also started my own foundation, focusing on educational opportunities for foster children aging out of the system. The Kelly Foundation for Youth Empowerment was small but growing, and it gave me a way to channel my wealth toward causes that mattered to me while building something meaningful for the future. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. The first guests were arriving, my new neighbors, people who'd moved in the same circles as Amanda and her husband, people who measured success in square footage and property values. I smoothed my black cocktail dress, one of several I'd bought specifically for occasions like this, and went to greet them. "Nadine, darling," gushed Catherine Worthington, the unofficial social coordinator of Meadowbrook Estates. "Your home is absolutely stunning. We're so excited to welcome you to the neighborhood." "Thank you, Catherine. I'm delighted to be here." More neighbors filtered in, along with colleagues from my foundation work, a few former clients who'd become friends, and some of the financial advisors and attorneys who'd helped me build my wealth over the years. The mix was intentional. I wanted this to be a true reflection of my life, not just a display of my financial success. Amanda and Derek arrived at 7, fashionably late as always. I watched through the window as they approached the front door, Amanda's head turning to take in every detail of the house and grounds. When I opened the door, her expression was carefully composed, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. "Dina, this is incredible," she said, stepping into the foyer and looking up at the crystal chandelier. "I had no idea you were looking at something this substantial." "Hello to you too, Amanda." Derek whistled low under his breath. "This place must be worth $3 million, easy. The lot alone in this neighborhood." 3.2, actually, I said mildly. "Would you like a tour?" I led them through the main floor, watching their faces as they took in room after room of carefully appointed luxury. The formal dining room with its mahogany table that seated 12. The chef's kitchen with commercial-grade appliances and granite countertops. The study lined with first-edition books and original artwork. "This is your office," Amanda asked, running her hand along the antique desk where I'd been working on grant proposals that morning. One of them. I have another set up upstairs for more casual work. And you bought all this? How? The same way anyone buys a house, Amanda. I made an offer, provided proof of funds, and wrote a check. Marcus and Jennifer arrived while I was showing Amanda and Derek the pool area. I could see Marcus's jaw drop as he took in the infinity pool, the outdoor kitchen, the perfectly manicured gardens that stretched to the property line. Jesus, Dinah, he said when I met them at the back door. This is like something from MTV Cribs. Thank you, I think. Jennifer was unusually quiet, her eyes taking in every detail with the sharp focus of someone trying to calculate exactly how much everything cost. When we rejoined the party inside, I overheard her whispering to Derek about property taxes and maintenance costs, as if she couldn't believe I'd be able to afford the upkeep. The evening progressed smoothly, with conversations flowing between different groups of guests. I found myself moving easily between discussing investment strategies with my financial advisor and talking about educational reform with former colleagues from the nonprofit world. For the first time in years, I felt like I could be completely myself without editing or apologizing or explaining. My parents arrived near the end of the evening, my father's eyes widening as he took in the scale of the house. My mother clutched his arm, looking overwhelmed by the grandeur of it all. "Sweetheart," she said when I hugged her. "Hello. This is beautiful. It's like a palace." "It's home, Mom. Come on, let me show you around." I gave them the full tour, saving the library for last because I knew my father would appreciate the collection of books I'd assembled. He ran his fingers along the spines, pausing at titles on economic theory and social policy. "You've read all of these?" he asked. "Most of them. Some twice. I never knew you were so interested in economics." "There's a lot you never knew about me, Dad, but that's changing." We rejoined the party, and I watched my parents trying to reconcile the daughter they thought they knew with the woman who owned this house, who moved confidently through conversations about municipal bonds and educational endowments. They looked proud but bewildered, like they were meeting me for the first time. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself standing in the living room with my immediate family. The contrast was stark, them clustered together like they weren't quite sure they belonged, me at ease in my own space, finally comfortable in my own skin. "Dina," Derek said, "I have to ask, what are your long-term plans here? I mean, financially speaking. You've made some significant investments recently. My long-term plans are to continue building wealth while using that wealth to make a positive impact. The foundation is just the beginning." "But this house, the car, the lifestyle changes. That's a lot of money to tie up in assets that don't generate income." I smiled, recognizing the tone. Derek was trying to give me financial advice, still operating under the assumption that I didn't understand the implications of my own decisions. "Derek, my liquid assets alone could buy 3 houses like this. The money I've spent on lifestyle improvements represents less than 5% of my total net worth. I'm not overextended." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Jennifer's face had gone pale. Marcus was staring at his hands. Amanda looked like she was trying to solve a complicated math problem in her head. "How much money do you actually have?" Jennifer asked bluntly. "Enough," I said. "More than enough." My mother stepped forward, her voice soft. "Honey, I think what everyone is trying to understand is how this all happened. How you went from being our little girl who worked at the nonprofit to this." She gestured around the room. "I didn't go from anything to anything, Mom. I've been building this wealth for 20 years. You just never knew about it because you never asked, and I didn't volunteer the information." "But why?" Amanda's voice was strained. "Why keep it secret? Why let us worry about you, think you were struggling?" "Because I wasn't struggling. Because I didn't need your worry, or your advice, or your pity. Because I wanted to be valued for who I was, not what I had." "And now?" Marcus asked. "Now I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of letting other people's assumptions dictate how I live my life. I'm tired of being ashamed of my success just because it doesn't look the way you think it should look." My father cleared his throat. Dina, we're not ashamed of your success. We're proud of you. We just wish we'd known sooner. Why? So you could treat me differently? So you could ask my opinion about investments and real estate instead of telling me I needed to get a real job? So you could include me in family financial discussions instead of assuming I had nothing to contribute? The questions hung in the air, uncomfortable truths that no one wanted to address directly. We made mistakes, Amanda said finally. We see that now. We misjudged you, and we're sorry. I know you're sorry, but I need you to understand that this isn't just about an apology. This is about a fundamental change in how we relate to each other going forward. What does that mean? Marcus asked. It means no more condescending advice about my career choices. No more assumptions about what I can or can't afford. No more treating me like the family member who needs to be taken care of, instead of the family member who might be able to help take care of others. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. Are you saying you want to be involved in family financial decisions now? I'm saying I want to be treated like an equal adult member of this family, which includes having my opinions valued and my capabilities respected. Of course, Derek said quickly. Absolutely. But I could see the calculation in his eyes, the wheels turning as he considered what my newfound financial status might mean for family dynamics. Who would pay for family vacations now? Who would cover emergency expenses? Who held the power in family discussions? There's something else, I said, because I decided weeks ago that if I was going to be honest, I was going to be completely honest. I've been thinking about how I want to use my wealth to benefit the family. Everyone perked up at that, their attention sharpening with interest. I'm establishing education funds for all the grandchildren, I continued. Full college tuition, graduate school if they choose, no strings attached, except that they maintain reasonable grades. My mother gasped. Dina, that's incredibly generous. I'm also setting up a family emergency fund. Medical expenses, job loss, natural disasters, whatever comes up that insurance doesn't cover, the family fund will handle it. Dina, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, you don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. I want to. But I want to do it on my terms, as an equal partner in this family's future, not as someone trying to buy acceptance or forgiveness. Amanda was crying now, quietly but openly. We don't deserve this. After everything we said, everything we assumed. You're right, you don't deserve it based on how you've treated me. But you deserve it because you're my family, and I love you despite your flaws. Just like you loved me despite thinking I was a failure. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from practical details about the education funds to broader questions about family dynamics and expectations. Slowly, I watched my siblings begin to see me not as their disappointing little sister, but as a successful woman who had her act together in ways they were only beginning to understand. When they finally left, my parents lingered at the door. My mother hugged me tightly, whispering that she was proud of me and sorry it had taken so long to really see me. My father shook my hand formally, then pulled me into a hug. You're remarkable, he said. I should have told you that years ago, but I'm telling you now. You're absolutely remarkable. After everyone was gone, I walked through my beautiful house, turning off lights and savoring the quiet. The evening had been a success, in ways I hadn't entirely expected. Not just because I'd shown my family the extent of my transformation, but because I'd finally felt comfortable being completely myself in their presence. The next few months brought a series of changes that rippled through every aspect of my life. The Kelly Foundation grew rapidly, attracting attention from other philanthropists and earning recognition for its innovative approaches to supporting foster youth. I was invited to speak at conferences, to serve on boards, to consult with other organizations looking to maximize their impact. My relationship with my family evolved too, slowly but steadily. Amanda called me for investment advice when she and Derek were considering a real estate purchase. Marcus asked my opinion about expanding his business. My parents began introducing me to their friends as our daughter the philanthropist, instead of our daughter who works with children. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. I stopped second-guessing my choices. stopped apologizing for my success, stopped hiding my accomplishments. When acquaintances asked what I did for work, I told them about the foundation with pride. When neighbors commented on my house or car, I thanked them graciously instead of deflecting with self-deprecating humor. I also started dating for the first time in years, meeting people through the foundation work and social events who valued intelligence and purpose as much as financial success. It was liberating to meet someone and not have to worry about whether they could see past my modest facade to the person underneath, because there was no facade anymore. 6 months after the housewarming party, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner for the first time in my adult life. The dining room that had impressed Derek so much was filled with family, the mahogany table set with china I'd inherited from my grandmother, and crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier above. As we sat around the table, sharing stories and passing dishes, I marveled at how much had changed. Amanda asked my advice about a charity she was considering supporting. Marcus mentioned a business opportunity he thought might interest me. My parents beamed with pride when Jennifer's mother complimented them on, quote, how well all their children had done. But the moment that meant the most came when my 8-year-old nephew asked me what I did for work. I help kids who don't have families find good places to live and go to school, I said. That's cool. Do you make a lot of money doing that? The table went quiet, everyone waiting to see how I'd handle the question that had dominated so many family conversations. I make enough, I said. But more importantly, I help make other people's lives better. That's worth more than money. He nodded seriously, satisfied with the answer, and asked for more mashed potatoes. The conversation resumed around the table, but I caught my mother's eye across the room. She was smiling through tears, and I knew she understood that her daughter had finally found peace with herself. Later that evening, as family members were getting ready to leave, Amanda pulled me aside. Dina, I need to say something. That night at the restaurant when I called you worthless, it was the cruelest thing I've ever said to anyone, and I've regretted it every day since. You were never worthless. You've always been the best of all of us, and I was too blind to see it. Amanda, no, let me finish. You didn't just show us your bank statements, you showed us who you really are. Someone who builds wealth to help others, who chooses meaningful work over easy money, who forgives family members who don't deserve forgiveness. You're not just successful, you're good. And I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize that. I hugged my sister, feeling the last of my anger and hurt finally release. Thank you for saying that. It means everything to me. As I cleaned up after everyone left, I found myself thinking about the woman I'd been just a year ago. Secretive, defensive, constantly trying to justify her choices to people who couldn't see past their own assumptions. That woman felt like a stranger now. The woman I'd become was someone who owned her success without apology, who used her wealth to create positive change, who refused to hide her light to make others comfortable. She was someone who had learned that true worth wasn't measured by bank accounts or possessions, but by the impact you made on the world and the authenticity with which you lived your life. I'd spent 20 years accumulating wealth in secret, but it had taken much longer to accumulate the courage to live openly as the person I actually was. Now that I had both the money and the confidence to use it well, I was finally ready to see what I could accomplish. The Kelly Foundation was just the beginning. I had plans for affordable housing developments, scholarship programs, business incubators for women and minorities. I had ideas for policy research and advocacy work that could change systems instead of just helping individuals. I had resources to make real, lasting change in areas that mattered to me. But more than that, I had peace. Peace with my choices, peace with my family, peace with myself. I was no longer the daughter who didn't quite fit, the sister who needed guidance, the woman who apologized for taking up space. I was Nadine Kelly, philanthropist and changemaker. Someone who had built something remarkable from nothing and was using it to build something even more remarkable for others. Standing in my beautiful kitchen, loading the last of the dishes into the dishwasher, I smiled at the thought of how far I'd come. My family might have called me completely worthless once upon a time, but I'd shown them my complete fortune. Not just the money, but the strength, the intelligence, the generosity, and the grace that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to shine. And now that it was shining, I had no intention of dimming it ever again. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my home office as I reviewed the quarterly reports from the Kelly Foundation. 2 years had passed since that transformative Thanksgiving dinner, and the foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations. What started as a personal mission to help foster youth had evolved into a multi-million-dollar organization, impacting thousands of lives across 3 states. I set down the financial statements and walked to the window, gazing out at the perfectly manicured gardens where my landscaping crew was preparing the grounds for today's event. In a few hours, I would be hosting the foundation's annual gala, welcoming donors, board members, and the young people whose lives had been changed by our programs. It was a far cry from the modest nonprofit office where I'd once worked in anonymity. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant, Rebecca, a former foster child who had aged out of the system 5 years ago and was now pursuing her master's degree in social work on a Kelly Foundation scholarship. The caterers are setting up in the ballroom. The florists just arrived. Everything is on schedule for tonight. I smiled, remembering the day Rebecca had first walked into my office at the old nonprofit, angry and defensive, convinced the world was against her. Now she was one of my most trusted colleagues, living proof that with the right support, any young person could overcome the obstacles life placed in their path. The transformation hadn't just been Rebecca's. In the past 2 years, I had watched dozens of young people move from uncertainty to success, from aging out of foster care with nothing to graduating college with bright futures ahead of them. The foundation provided not just financial support, but mentorship, life skills training, and the kind of emotional support that made all the difference during the difficult transition to independence. My personal life had evolved as well. I was no longer the woman who hid her success behind modest clothes and self-deprecating humor. I had learned to own my accomplishments, to speak confidently about my work, to dress in a way that reflected both my success and my values. The transformation had been gradual but profound, like watching a butterfly emerge from its cocoon. The doorbell chimed, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at my watch. It was barely 10 in the morning, too early for any gala preparations. When I opened the door, I found Amanda standing on my doorstep, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "I brought peace offerings," she said, holding up the cups. "Your favorite vanilla latte with oat milk. Amanda, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be getting ready for tonight? I wanted to talk to you before the chaos begins. Before you're surrounded by donors and board members and reporters." She paused, studying my face. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, curious about what had prompted this unexpected visit. We made our way to the sunroom, where morning light filtered through the glass ceiling and my collection of orchids created a peaceful atmosphere. Amanda settled into one of the wicker chairs, still holding both coffee cups like a shield. "Dina, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said a long time ago." She handed me one of the lattes, her hands trembling slightly. "I've been watching you these past 2 years, watching what you've built, how you've changed, or maybe how you've finally become who you always were meant to be." I sipped my coffee, waiting for her to continue. Amanda rarely showed vulnerability, and I could see the effort it was taking for her to find the right words. "Do you remember when we were kids, and you used to organize those elaborate charity drives for your stuffed animals? You'd set up a whole adoption agency in your bedroom, complete with application forms and home visits for our dolls." I laughed despite myself. I'd forgotten about that. Mom thought I was being too controlling. I thought you were being weird. All the other kids wanted to play house or school, and you wanted to reunite teddy bears with loving families. Amanda's voice grew soft. "I should have seen it then, that you were always meant to help people, that you had this incredible capacity for caring about others." "Amanda, where is this coming from?" She took a deep breath. "Yesterday, I got a call from Jennifer Martinez. Do you remember her? She was one of the teenagers at the nonprofit when you were working there." I nodded. Jennifer had been one of my first success stories, a young woman who had aged out of foster care and was struggling to find her place in the world. She's graduating from law school next month. Full scholarship to Georgetown, internship lined up at a prestigious firm, the whole works. And she called me because she wanted to make sure someone from your family would be at her graduation. My throat tightened. I had lost touch with Jennifer after leaving the nonprofit, though I'd heard through mutual contacts that she was doing well. She told me that you were the first adult who ever believed in her, the first person who saw potential instead of problems. She said you helped her apply for college, drove her to campus visits, even co-signed her first apartment lease because she had no credit history. That was my job, Amanda. That's what we did at the nonprofit. No, Dina, that's what you did. She called 3 other social workers from that time, and while they all remembered her fondly, none of them went beyond the basic requirements of their position. You were the one who stayed late to help with college applications. You were the one who used your own money to buy her interview clothes. You were the one who showed up to her high school graduation when her foster family couldn't make it. I felt tears prick my eyes, remembering that graduation ceremony. Jennifer had been so proud, so nervous, so hopeful about her future. I had taken the day off work to be there, sitting in the auditorium applauding as she walked across the stage. Jennifer said something else, Amanda continued. She said that when she found out about your foundation, about the house and the money and all of it, she wasn't surprised at all. She said she always knew there was something special about you, something that went beyond what anyone could see on the surface. Amanda, and that's when I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. The money, the house, the success, none of that changed who you are. It just gave you the resources to be more fully yourself. You were always the person who would build a foundation to help foster kids. You were always the person who would use your wealth to make the world better. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy judging you by my own narrow definitions of success. We sat in silence for a moment, the morning sun warming the glass around us. I could hear the sounds of preparation outside, vendors arriving, staff coordinating logistics for the evening's event. But inside this peaceful space, it felt like Amanda and I were having the conversation we should have had years ago. I'm proud of you, she said finally. Not because of the money, not because of the house or the foundation or any of the external measures of success. I'm proud of you because you stayed true to yourself even when it would have been easier to change. I'm proud of you because you forgave us when we didn't deserve forgiveness. I'm proud of you because you turned your pain into purpose. I reached across the space between our chairs and took her hand. Thank you for saying that. You have no idea how much I needed to hear it. I should have said it sooner. I should have seen it sooner. She squeezed my hand. But I'm saying it now, and I want you to know that when I introduce you to people tonight, I won't be talking about your portfolio or your property values. I'll be talking about my sister, the changemaker, my sister who builds bridges and transforms lives. After Amanda left, I spent the rest of the morning in quiet reflection. The house buzzed with activity as vendors prepared for the evening's gala, but I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this point. Not just the financial success or the recognition, but the deeper transformation that had occurred within me. For so many years, I had carried the weight of my family's expectations and judgments, constantly trying to prove my worth through their narrow lens of achievement. I had hidden my true self, dimmed my light, apologized for my choices. But somewhere along the way, I had learned that the only approval that truly mattered was my own. The afternoon passed quickly as I prepared for the gala. I chose my outfit carefully, a midnight blue gown that struck the perfect balance between elegance and approachability. The dress was expensive, beautifully tailored but not ostentatious. It was the kind of outfit that commanded respect without demanding attention, exactly the image I wanted to project as the foundation's founder. My hairstylist and makeup artist arrived at 4, transforming me from a casually dressed philanthropist into the polished executive who would address 200 influential guests tonight. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I marveled again at how much had changed. The woman looking back at me was confident, successful, comfortable in her own skin. She was someone who belonged in boardrooms and ballrooms, someone whose opinions mattered and whose work made a difference. But she was also, fundamentally, the same person who had once organized teddy bear adoption agencies in her childhood bedroom. The same person who had stayed late to help Jennifer with college applications. The same person who had chosen meaningful work over easy money, even when it meant enduring her family's misguided pity. The guests began arriving at 6, and I positioned myself in the grand foyer to greet them personally. The guest list was impressive. Major donors, corporate executives, political figures, and celebrities who supported our cause. But scattered among the VIPs were the young people who were the real reason for this gathering, the current and former foster youth whose success stories would be celebrated tonight. Marcus arrived early with Jennifer, both of them dressed in formal attire that spoke of careful preparation for this important family event. Marcus had changed significantly in the past 2 years, moving from skepticism about my work to genuine enthusiasm for the Foundation's mission. He had even convinced his automotive dealership to sponsor our scholarship program, providing career training and internship opportunities for young people interested in the trades. "Dina, you look absolutely stunning," Jennifer said, giving me a careful hug that wouldn't disturb my formal attire. "Marcus has been talking about tonight all week. He's so proud to be part of this." I smiled at my brother, remembering the man who had once questioned whether I could afford a luxury car. Now he served on the Foundation's board of directors and was one of our most passionate advocates. "The scholarship recipients we're honoring tonight," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I read their stories, their achievements, Dina, what you've built here is incredible. These kids have overcome obstacles I can't even imagine." My parents arrived next, my father distinguished in his formal tuxedo, my mother radiant in a silver gown that complemented her gray hair perfectly. They had aged gracefully in the past 2 years, and I could see pride radiating from them as they took in the elegant surroundings and the impressive gathering of guests. "Sweetheart," my mother said, taking my hands in hers, "every time I see you like this, leading this foundation, making such a difference in the world, I think about that little girl who used to rescue injured birds and nurse them back to health in shoeboxes." "You always had such a big heart," my father added. "We just didn't always know how to support it properly." Derek and Amanda were among the last family members to arrive, and I could see Amanda's nervousness as she approached. Public events weren't her favorite, and she had confided in me earlier that she was worried about saying the right things to the other guests. "Remember," I told her quietly, "you belong here. This is your foundation too, your family's legacy. Be proud of what we've accomplished together." The cocktail hour buzzed with conversation as guests mingled and learned about the Foundation's work. I moved through the crowd, introducing foster youth to potential mentors, connecting corporate donors with program directors, facilitating the kind of conversations that would lead to lasting partnerships and support. But the moment that would stay with me forever came when Rebecca approached me near the silent auction display, her face glowing with excitement. "Dina, there's someone I want you to meet," she said, gesturing to a young man in his early 20s who stood nearby. "This is David Chen. He aged out of foster care 3 years ago and just graduated from MIT with a degree in computer engineering." David stepped forward, extending his hand with a confidence that spoke of hard-won self-assurance. "Ms. Kelly, it's an honor to meet you. Rebecca told me about the Foundation, about all the opportunities you're creating for people like us. Please call me Dina, and congratulations on your graduation. MIT is incredibly competitive." "Thank you. I wanted to tell you something," David said, his voice growing serious. 3 years ago, when I aged out of the system, I had nowhere to go and no idea how to navigate the world as an adult. I was working 3 part-time jobs just to afford a studio apartment, and college seemed like an impossible dream. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But then I heard about a program for former foster youth. Not your foundation, but one of the organizations you helped establish before starting your own work. They provided mentorship, financial assistance, help with college applications. Without that support, I never would have made it to MIT." I felt a familiar warmth spreading through my chest, the satisfaction that came from knowing that your work had truly mattered in someone's life. "Now I'm starting my career at a tech company in Silicon Valley," David continued. "But more importantly, I'm launching a nonprofit focused on providing coding education and tech mentorship to current foster youth. I want to create the kind of opportunities for them that organizations like yours created for me." "David, that's wonderful. If there's any way the Kelly Foundation can support your work..." "Actually, that's what I was hoping to discuss." Rebecca thought you might be interested in collaborating, maybe providing some seed funding or connecting me with potential board members. I looked at this poised young man, seeing in him the same potential that I had recognized in Rebecca, in Jennifer, in so many others over the years. He was proof that with the right support at the right moment, any young person could overcome their circumstances and build a meaningful life. I would love to discuss a partnership, I said. Why don't we set up a meeting next week to talk about how we can work together? As the evening progressed and we moved into the ballroom for dinner and presentations, I found myself reflecting on the ripple effects of purposeful action. David would go on to help other young people who would in turn help others, creating an expanding circle of positive impact that would reach far beyond anything I could accomplish alone. The keynote speaker for the evening was Dr. Sarah Williams, a renowned expert on child welfare policy who had worked with some of the most prestigious organizations in the field. But before she spoke, I had the privilege of introducing 3 scholarship recipients who exemplified the Foundation's mission. Standing at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces illuminated by candlelight, I felt a profound sense of purpose and belonging. These were my people, not because they shared my economic status or social position, but because they shared my values and commitment to making the world better for the most vulnerable among us. 2.5 years ago, I began, I made a decision to stop hiding who I was and start living authentically as the person I had always been meant to be. That decision led to the creation of this foundation, but more importantly, it led to connections with remarkable young people who remind me every day why this work matters. I introduced Maria Santos, who had aged out of foster care at 18 and was now completing her nursing degree while working full-time to support her younger siblings. I talked about James Washington, who had overcome a childhood of neglect and abuse to become a talented artist whose work was being featured in galleries across the region. I shared the story of Aisha Patel, who had used her Kelly Foundation scholarship to study environmental science and was now developing sustainable technology solutions for underserved communities. As each young person took the stage to share their story, I watched the audience respond with increasingly enthusiastic applause. These weren't just feel-good anecdotes or charity cases to be pitied. These were brilliant, accomplished individuals who had overcome extraordinary obstacles to achieve remarkable success. But the moment that moved me most came during the silent auction results. When Amanda stood up at her table and announced that she was donating $100,000 to establish a new scholarship fund in honor of Jennifer Martinez, the young woman whose graduation had prompted our morning conversation. "My sister taught me something important about true worth," Amanda said, her voice carrying clearly through the bios microphone. "It's not measured in bank accounts or property values. It's measured in the lives we touch, the people we lift up, the legacy we leave behind." Tonight, I want to honor both my sister and a remarkable young woman whose success story reminds us all of what's possible when someone believes in us. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it over the sound of my own heart beating with pride and love. This was Amanda's way of publicly acknowledging not just my work, but the fundamental shift in our family's understanding of what it meant to be successful. Dr. Williams's keynote address was powerful and inspiring, calling on the audience to think systemically about child welfare and to support organizations like ours that were creating real, lasting change. She spoke about the importance of providing not just financial support, but emotional scaffolding for young people transitioning out of foster care. "The Kelly Foundation represents something remarkable in our field," she said, gesturing toward where I sat at the head table. "It combines significant financial resources with deep personal understanding of the population it serves. But more than that, it's led by someone who sees potential where others see problems, who builds bridges where others see barriers." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself surrounded by young people who wanted to share their stories, express their gratitude, or simply connect with someone who understood their experiences. These conversations were the real reward for all the planning and fundraising and logistics that went into events like this. Rebecca approached me as I was saying goodbye to the last of the scholarship recipients. "Dina, can I tell you something? Tonight was magical, but it was also strategic. Do you realize how many new partnerships we established? How many potential board members we identified? How many young people made connections that will change their lives?" I smiled, appreciating her sharp mind for both the emotional and practical aspects of our work. That was always the goal. to create a space where meaningful connections could happen. Well, mission accomplished. David already has 3 potential mentors who want to support his tech nonprofit. Maria connected with a hospital administrator who's interested in creating a nursing scholarship specifically for former foster youth. And James got commissioned for 2 new art pieces from collectors who were here tonight. As the catering staff cleaned up and the vendors packed away their displays, I walked through my empty house feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The evening had been about more than fundraising or recognition. It had been about community, about bringing together people who shared a commitment to justice and opportunity. I found myself in my study, looking at the wall where I'd hung framed photos from various foundation events. Pictures of scholarship recipients at graduation ceremonies, young people receiving internship placements, former foster youth who had gone on to start their own businesses or organizations. Each photo represented a life changed, a potential realized, a dream achieved. But perhaps my favorite picture was one taken earlier that evening, showing my entire family gathered around a scholarship recipient named Michael who was about to start medical school. In the photo, Amanda and Marcus were listening intently as Michael explained his research interests. My parents were beaming with pride, not just for their accomplished daughter, but for the young man whose success they had played a small part in supporting. Derek and Jennifer were taking notes, clearly planning to stay connected with Michael as he pursued his studies. It was a picture of a family that had learned to see success not just in personal achievements, but in collective impact. A family that had grown beyond their original narrow definitions of worth and value. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Kelly, this is Jennifer Martinez. I heard you might be at my law school graduation next month. I wanted you to know that I'll be speaking as the student representative, and I plan to mention the social worker who changed my life by believing in me when no one else would. Thank you for everything. See you soon." I sat down in my desk chair, looking out the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there were hundreds of young people who had been touched by the Foundation's work, who were building careers and families and dreams because someone had invested in their potential. Some I knew personally, others I would never meet, but all of them were connected by the simple belief that every person deserved a chance to thrive. The woman I had become, successful, confident, unapologetic about her achievements, was someone I finally recognized and respected. But more importantly, she was someone who used her success to create opportunities for others, who understood that true wealth came not from accumulation, but from transformation. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about the conversation with Amanda that had started the day. Her words about staying true to myself, despite pressure to change, had resonated deeply. For too many years, I had tried to be smaller, quieter, less threatening to other people's assumptions about who I should be. But tonight had been a celebration of authentic success, the kind that emerged when you stopped apologizing for your gifts and started using them purposefully. The kind that created ripple effects extending far beyond your own life. The kind that meant something. The Kelly Foundation would continue to grow, reaching more young people and creating more opportunities. My relationship with my family would continue to evolve, built now on mutual respect rather than condescending concern. And I would continue to discover new ways to use my resources and platform to address systemic inequities. But most importantly, I would never again hide who I was to make other people comfortable. The world needed people who were willing to be fully themselves, completely and unapologetically, using their talents and resources to create positive change. I had finally learned what it meant to show them my complete fortune. Not just the money, but the wisdom, the compassion, the strategic thinking, and the unwavering commitment to justice that had always been my true wealth. And I would never stop sharing that fortune with the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.